Some things die fast. A company can announce bankruptcy on a Monday and be gone by Friday. A stock can crash in an afternoon. A merger can dissolve before the ink is dry. But some things take much longer to die. They decay, slowly, imperceptibly at first, then faster. Then all at once, in a single desperate weekend, when the people responsible for preventing the collapse finally admit what everyone else already knows. That is the story of Credit Suisse. On March 17, 2023, a Friday, the Swiss government convened an emergency session that would not end until Sunday. The subject was a bank that had been standing since 1856, a bank that had financed the Swiss railway system, survived 2 world wars, navigated the Great Depression, weathered the 2008 financial crisis, and emerged from each of those ordeals still standing, still trading, still one of the most recognizable names in global finance. In that emergency weekend session, the Swiss government, the Swiss National Bank, and the financial regulator FINMA reached a conclusion that they had been trying to avoid for months, possibly years. Credit Suisse could not be saved as an independent institution. It had to be absorbed, consumed, made to disappear into the balance sheet of its larger, steadier rival UBS before the Asian markets opened on Monday morning and the contagion of its collapse spread to the rest of the global financial system. The price UBS paid for a bank that had recently been valued at over $30 billion, 3 billion Swiss francs, roughly $3.3 billion, a fraction of book value, an amount that in the scale of global banking barely registers as a rounding error. 167 years, $3 billion, 1 weekend. How does something like this happen? The answer is not a single scandal. It is not a rogue trader or a bad quarter or an external shock that nobody could have predicted. The answer is something far more insidious, far more human, and far more instructive. The answer is institutional decay, the gradual erosion, scandal by scandal, loss by loss, leadership failure by leadership failure of everything a bank ultimately runs on. Trust. This is that story. To understand what was lost when Credit Suisse collapsed, you need to understand what it was. Not just the numbers, the balance sheet, the market capitalization, the employee count, the idea, the identity. Credit Suisse was founded in 1856 by Alfred Escher, a Swiss politician and entrepreneur who had a specific and practical problem to solve. Switzerland needed a railway system, and building one required capital that the country didn't have readily available in domestic financial institutions. Escher built the Schweizerische Kreditanstalt, the Swiss credit institution, as the vehicle to finance the industrialization of Switzerland. The bank's founding purpose was national infrastructure. It was built to do something real and large and important. That founding purpose shaped the institution's identity for more than a century. Credit Suisse became one of Switzerland's most significant financial institutions, a bank that combined retail and commercial banking for Swiss citizens with increasingly sophisticated international investment banking as the 20th century progressed. By the post-war decades, Credit Suisse had become synonymous with the particular qualities that Swiss banking had made its global brand: discretion, stability, precision, the careful management of other people's money with the seriousness it deserved. Switzerland's unique position in global finance, neutral, politically stable, legally protective of client confidentiality, operating outside the major currency unions while being deeply embedded in European commerce, made Swiss banks the preferred custodians for wealth from every corner of the world. The clients of Credit Suisse's private banking division were, over the decades, a remarkable cross-section of global wealth: European aristocracy, Middle Eastern sovereign wealth, American corporations, Latin American industrialists, Asian billionaires. The bank's private banking franchise was one of the most valuable wealth management operations in the world. By the 1990s, Credit Suisse had transformed into something more ambitious and more complex than its founding charter imagined. The bank had merged with First Boston an American investment bank with a significant Wall Street presence, to create CS First Boston, which was subsequently renamed Credit Suisse First Boston, and eventually simply the investment banking division of Credit Suisse. The merger brought with it the culture, the risk appetite, and the compensation structures of American investment banking, a very different animal from the cautious, client-focused culture of Swiss private banking. This cultural collision between the Swiss tradition of careful stewardship and the Wall Street tradition of aggressive risk-taking was the original fault line in Credit Suisse's identity. The bank was trying to be two things simultaneously: the trusted custodian of generational wealth for some of the world's most private clients, and a Wall Street-style investment bank that competed for the most lucrative and most dangerous financial transactions on the planet. These two identities were not naturally compatible, and managing the tension between them required either extraordinary leadership or the willingness to accept that the tension could never be fully resolved. Credit Suisse's history in the decades leading up to its collapse is, in one reading, the story of that tension being poorly managed for a very long time. But the bank survived plenty of turbulence. The dot-com crash of 2000-2001 hit Credit Suisse First Boston hard. The bank had been deeply involved in the technology IPO boom and suffered significant losses when it ended. The 2008 financial crisis, which destroyed or permanently impaired several of Credit Suisse's peers, including Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, and later UBS in Switzerland, damaged Credit Suisse significantly, but did not break it. The bank emerged from 2008 in better shape than many of its competitors, having been somewhat less exposed to the most toxic elements of the American mortgage securities market. For a moment, around 2010 to 2012, Credit Suisse looked like it might be one of the survivors that emerged stronger from the crisis, a bank that had learned from near disaster without suffering the catastrophic losses that had forced UBS into a government rescue. The moment passed, and what came next between roughly 2012 and 2023 was a sequence of events that the bank's management, its board, and its regulators repeatedly described as isolated incidents, temporary setbacks, and problems that were being addressed. They were not isolated, they were not temporary, and they were not being adequately addressed. They were symptoms of something that had already been building for years. Let's establish a principle that will run through this entire story. Institutional decay does not announce itself. It accumulates. Each individual failure is managed, explained away, fined, apologized for, and filed in the category of problems that have been addressed. It is only when you lay the failures side by side, in sequence, that the pattern becomes visible. The pattern not of isolated mistakes, but of systemic rot. Credit Suisse's modern scandal era arguably begins in the early 2010s, though the roots go back further. What characterized this era was not one spectacular failure, but a relentless, embarrassing, expensive drip of misconduct that touched virtually every major business line the bank operated. Tax evasion. In 2014, Credit Suisse pleaded guilty in U.S. federal court to conspiring to help American clients evade taxes through undisclosed Swiss accounts. This was a criminal guilty plea, not a civil settlement, not a fine with no admission of wrongdoing, but an actual admission that the bank had systematically and deliberately helped thousands of American clients hide money from the IRS. The fine was $2.6 billion. It was, at the time, one of the largest penalties in banking history. Credit Suisse paid it, replaced some executives, and described the settlement as an important step in resolving legacy issues. Mozambique. In 2021, Credit Suisse was fined $475 million by US and UK authorities for its role in a breathtaking corruption scheme involving Mozambique's government. Between 2013 and 2016, Credit Suisse bankers had helped arrange loans totaling over $2 billion for Mozambique, ostensibly to fund a maritime security operation and a state-owned tuna fishing company. The loans, which became known as the tuna bonds, were used in part to pay approximately $50 million in bribes to Credit Suisse bankers and government officials, and to fund private expenditures that had nothing to do with maritime security or tuna. the people of Mozambique were left with a debt burden they could not service, a debt that contributed to a sovereign default and years of economic hardship. Credit Suisse again paid the fine, described it as a legacy issue, and moved on. Bulgaria. A separate investigation found that Credit Suisse had allowed Bulgarian organized crime figures to deposit and launder money through its correspondent banking relationships. The bank was fined by Swiss regulators in 2021 for inadequate money laundering controls. The espionage affair. In 2019, Credit Suisse's CEO at the time, Tidjane Thiam, became the central figure in one of the most surreal corporate scandals in banking history. The bank's head of wealth management, Iqbal Khan, resigned after what was described as a difficult relationship with Thiam, and then accepted a position at UBS, Credit Suisse's main Swiss competitor. Credit Suisse's management, apparently concerned about Khan's knowledge of client relationships and business strategies, hired private investigators to follow him. Khan noticed the surveillance, confronted the operatives, and the story exploded into the Swiss and international press. The surveillance scandal produced the resignation of the bank's chief operating officer, who was blamed for ordering it, and a criminal investigation. For weeks, Swiss financial media was consumed by stories about senior bankers being tailed by private detectives through the streets of Zurich. It was, for a bank that had built its brand on discretion and professionalism, an almost perfectly calibrated reputational catastrophe. Thiam himself was initially cleared of personal involvement. The board found he hadn't ordered the surveillance. But the board was itself divided. The internal investigation was questioned, and the damage to the culture of the institution, the trust between senior executives, the sense that management was conducting itself with anything approaching integrity, was severe. Thiam resigned anyway, in February 2020, under pressure from major shareholders. Credit Suisse was now on its third CEO in several years. Each transition was accompanied by promises of cultural transformation, improved risk management, and a renewed focus on the bank's core strengths. Each transition was followed by more failures. The failures, however, were about to become dramatically larger. "2021 is the year Credit Suisse's slow decay became a visible collapse in slow motion. The year in which two separate risk management failures, arriving within weeks of each other, cost the bank over $10 billion and made clear to anyone paying attention that the institution's internal controls were not functioning at anything like the level a major global bank required. First, Greensill Capital. Greensill Capital was a financial services company founded by an Australian named Lex Greensill, who had built a significant business in supply chain finance, a legitimate and useful financial product that helps companies manage the gap between when they pay their suppliers and when they collect from their customers. What Greensill had also done, less legitimately and far less usefully, was construct a set of financial instruments of increasing opacity and risk, package them as safe short-term investments, and distribute them to investors through funds managed and marketed by Credit Suisse's asset management division. Credit Suisse had approximately $10 billion of client money invested in Greensill-linked funds. The marketing materials for these funds described them as low-risk, short-term investments, essentially cash equivalents, the kind of thing that conservative institutional investors use as parking places for money they need available quickly. This characterization was, to put it gently, not accurate. Lex Greensill had been inserting increasingly speculative financial instruments into the funds, loans to companies with questionable creditworthiness, prospective receivables that were not actual receivables but anticipated future business, concentrations in single borrowers like Sanjeev Gupta's GFG alliance that far exceeded what prudent diversification would permit. Credit Suisse's asset management team, which was supposed to be monitoring the funds and ensuring that the underlying assets matched what had been represented to investors, was not doing that job. When Greensill Capital collapsed in March 2021, after its primary insurer refused to renew insurance coverage for its receivables, exposing the fragility of its entire business model, Credit Suisse was left trying to wind down $10 billion in funds backed by assets that were worth significantly less than represented. Over $3 billion in losses were eventually crystallized. Thousands of investors, including pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and individual wealth management clients who had been told they were in low-risk investments, were harmed. The Greensill collapse was still being processed when 2 weeks later, Archegos Capital Management imploded. Archegos was the family office of Bill Huang, a former Tiger management trader who had previously been charged with insider trading by the SEC, settled the charges, and had nevertheless been allowed to open accounts with Credit Suisse, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Nomura, and other major banks. Through these accounts, Huang had built, using a financial instrument called a total return swap, which allowed him to control enormous positions without technically owning the underlying shares or disclosing his exposure, a portfolio of concentrated, highly leveraged bets on specific stocks, including Viacom CBS, Discovery, and several Chinese technology companies. The positions were enormous. By March 2021, Huang controlled, in effect, exposure of approximately $80 billion to a relatively small number of stocks, an extraordinary concentration that was invisible to any individual bank because the total exposure was distributed across multiple prime brokerage relationships, with each bank seeing only its own piece. When the stocks began to fall in late March 2021, the banks that had lent Huang money to build these positions began issuing margin calls, demands for additional collateral as the value of the positions declined. The banks that moved first, Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, sold their collateral quickly and recovered most of their exposure. Credit Suisse, which was slower to act and apparently less aggressive in its initial response, was left holding losses that eventually reached approximately $5.5 billion. It was one of the largest single trading losses in the history of investment banking. The sequence of two catastrophic risk management failures, Greensill and Archegos, within weeks of each other, combined with the ongoing legacy scandal costs, produced a specific and damaging narrative about Credit Suisse. The narrative that the bank's risk management was not merely imperfect, but fundamentally broken. That the institution lacked the internal discipline to identify, monitor, and respond to the risks it was accumulating. That the repeated failures were not bad luck, but systemic inadequacy. The bank's response was comprehensive on paper: a new risk management framework, senior departures, a board-level review, a strategic overhaul. Chief Risk Officer Laura Warner departed. Investment banking co-head Brian Chin departed. An independent review commissioned by the board was eventually published, describing a fundamental failure of management and controls in the Archegos situation. But something had changed in the market's perception of Credit Suisse that a restructuring announcement could not easily reverse. The institution had lost something it would never fully recover. One of the clearest diagnostic signs of an institution in serious trouble is an inability to maintain stable, credible leadership. Strong institutions attract strong leaders, retain them, support them, and build continuity of strategy over time. Troubled institutions cycle through leaders, each new arrival announcing a fresh start, finding the problems worse than represented, attempting reforms that don't take hold before being replaced by the next fresh start. Credit Suisse's executive suite from 2015 to 2023 was a masterclass in the revolving door. Brady Dugan, an American who had led the bank since 2007, left in 2015 under pressure related to the tax evasion settlement. Tidjane Thiam, the Ivorian-British former insurance executive who replaced him, built early momentum before the espionage scandal ended his tenure in 2020. Thomas Gottstein, a Credit Suisse lifer who replaced Thiam, was in the chair during Greensill and Archegos and left in 2022 after losses that destroyed whatever goodwill his appointment had generated. Ulrich Kerner, the restructuring specialist brought in as Gottstein's replacement, became the final CEO, the man in the chair when the institution stopped existing. 4 CEOs in 8 years. each one arriving with a mandate for change, a plan for stability, a set of promises to investors and regulators and clients that things would be different this time, each one departing with the institution worse than they found it. The board of directors bore significant responsibility for this pattern. Axel Lehman, who became chairman in January 2022, replacing Antonio Horta Osorio, who had himself resigned after just 9 months following revelations that he had violated COVID quarantine rules on multiple occasions, including to attend the Wimbledon tennis championships, inherited a board governance situation that had been dysfunctional for years. Horta Osorio's brief tenure deserves its own paragraph because it is a remarkable episode. He was brought in as chairman in April 2021 specifically to provide steady, credible leadership at board level after the Greensill and Archegos debacles. He lasted 9 months. His departure for COVID rule violations in the middle of a pandemic during which his decisions about when the bank's rules applied to him personally generated obvious comparisons with the ethical failures of the institution he was supposed to be reforming was a fiasco that generated international press coverage and reinforced every negative narrative about Credit Suisse's leadership. The leadership churn was particularly damaging because it prevented the execution of any coherent multi-year strategy. Credit Suisse announced, revised, and re-announced its strategic direction so many times between 2015 and 2023 that the announcements themselves lost credibility. Investors who had been told the investment bank was being cut back, then rebuilt, then cut back again, then restructured through a partial IPO of the revived CS First Boston brand, eventually stopped believing that any announced strategy would survive long enough to be executed. Underneath the leadership carousel, talent was bleeding away. The senior bankers and wealth managers who carried the institutional knowledge, the client relationships, and the genuine expertise that a bank like Credit Suisse needed to generate revenue were leaving. Some were poached by competitors. Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and UBS picked up talent specifically because of Credit Suisse's instability. Others simply decided that the reputational association with a scandal-hit institution was not worth the compensation. The loss of talent was harder to see on a balance sheet than the Archegos write-down, but it was, in its cumulative effect, equally destructive. A bank is ultimately its people, the relationships they carry, the judgment they bring, the clients who stay because they trust a specific individual rather than an institution. When the people leave, the clients often follow. And in 2022, something started happening that made the people and client problem existential. October 2022. Credit Suisse is in the middle of a strategic restructuring announcement, the latest in a long series, that is supposed to signal a new direction, a leaner investment bank, a refocused wealth management operation, a credible path to sustainable profitability. The announcement is scheduled for October 27th. The bank needs the period leading up to it to be stable. Instead, something happens that would not have been possible 20 years ago, and that illuminated a new and particularly dangerous dimension of banking in the social media era. On October 1st, 2022, an Australian financial journalist sends a single tweet. The tweet contains what appears to be leaked information, suggesting that a major international investment bank is on the verge of collapse. The journalist does not name the bank, but the tweet circulates rapidly in financial communities, and within hours, speculation has converged on Credit Suisse, which is, at that moment, the institution most visibly struggling in the global banking sector. The speculation is not accurate. Credit Suisse is not on the verge of collapse in October 2022. It is struggling, it is in restructuring, it has serious problems, but it is not facing imminent failure. But in the age of Twitter and WhatsApp and Reddit finance forums, accuracy is not the primary determinant of market impact. Speed and amplification are. Within 24 hours, the credit default swap spreads on Credit Suisse debt, the market indicator of how much investors are paying to insure against a Credit Suisse default, are spiking. Journalists around the world are writing stories not about whether Credit Suisse is collapsing, but about whether Credit Suisse is collapsing, which produces the same market effect. The bank's communications team is issuing frantic reassurances. Senior executives are making calls to major clients, to analysts, to journalists, attempting to stop the bleeding. Credit Suisse's stock falls sharply. Clients in the wealth management business, the very clients whose assets represent the foundation of the bank's most stable revenue stream, begin pulling money. Not a full bank run, not immediately, but a steady acceleration of outflows that had already begun earlier in the year and now intensifies. In the fourth quarter of 2022, Credit Suisse reports net new asset outflows of approximately 110 billion Swiss francs from its wealth management business, over $100 billion in a single quarter, withdrawn by clients who had decided that the risk of keeping their assets at Credit Suisse outweighed whatever advantages the relationship had previously offered. The October crisis passes without an immediate collapse. The strategic plan is announced. Kerner gives interviews projecting confidence. The bank raises capital, issuing new shares that dilute existing shareholders but provide a capital buffer. Saudi National Bank, the largest bank in Saudi Arabia, acquires a 9.9% stake, becoming a significant new shareholder and providing a vote of confidence that stabilizes the situation for several months. But the client outflows do not reverse. They continue into the first quarter of 2023. The wealth management business, the crown jewel, the supposedly stable core that was supposed to anchor the entire restructuring, is hemorrhaging assets at a pace that makes the financial projections underlying the restructuring plan increasingly implausible. And then, in March 2023, the American banking system experienced its own crisis. The timing could not have been worse for a bank already bleeding. March 10th, 2023, Silicon Valley Bank, a California-based lender that had been the go-to bank for the American startup ecosystem for decades, collapses. It is the second largest bank failure in American history, surpassed only by Washington Mutual's 2008 collapse. Within days, Signature Bank also fails. The American bank failures trigger global anxiety about the banking sector. Investors who had accepted the assurances of banking regulators and executives that the post-2008 regulatory framework had made banks safe enough begin to question that assumption. The questions focus, naturally, on the banks that were already visibly struggling. In Europe, one name appeared at the top of every anxious analyst's list: Credit Suisse. On March 15, 2023, Credit Suisse's annual report is published, containing what would prove to be a statement of remarkable timing. The bank's auditor, PricewaterhouseCoopers, identified material weaknesses in the bank's internal controls over financial reporting. Material weaknesses. In an auditor's language, this is not a minor qualification. It is a signal that the financial statements cannot be fully relied upon because the systems and processes that produce them have fundamental problems. On the same day, Ammar al-Hudari, the chairman of Saudi National Bank, the institution that had committed $1.5 billion to Credit Suisse just 4 months earlier, was asked in a Bloomberg television interview whether Saudi National Bank would be prepared to provide additional capital to Credit Suisse if needed. His answer was a single word: absolutely not. The context of his response, that Saudi National Bank was constrained by regulatory limits that prevented it from owning more than 10% of another bank, a factual and somewhat mundane regulatory point, was essentially irrelevant. What the market heard was Credit Suisse's largest recent investor publicly saying it would not invest more. In a day already charged with anxiety about bank stability, the statement was catastrophic. Credit Suisse's shares fell 24% in a single day. The credit default swaps, which were already elevated, spiked to levels that implied a significant probability of default. The rate at which client money was leaving accelerated from the already alarming pace of the previous months. On March 15th alone, clients withdrew an estimated 10 billion Swiss francs in a single day. A 10 billion franc single-day outflow. The number crystallizes what a bank run in the modern era looks like. Not people queuing outside branches, as in the historical imagery of 1930s bank panics, but electrons. Instantaneous digital transfers, moving from Credit Suisse accounts to whatever institution the client had decided was safer at the speed of a click. The Swiss National Bank announced an emergency credit line of 50 billion Swiss francs, roughly $54 billion, available to Credit Suisse. The announcement was designed to signal that the central bank stood behind the institution, that liquidity was available, that the situation was manageable. In calmer circumstances, a central bank backstop of that scale would have been enough to arrest a bank run. The circumstances were not calm. The money kept leaving, and in Zurich and Bern, the phone calls were being made. Friday, March 17th, 2023, Zurich and Bern, Switzerland. The Swiss Federal Department of Finance, the Swiss National Bank, and FINMA, the Swiss financial regulator, are in emergency session. The people in those rooms include some of the most senior officials in the Swiss financial system, individuals who have spent careers managing banking stability in a country whose reputation for financial solidity is a national economic asset. They understand what they are dealing with. They have been watching Credit Suisse's deterioration for months, possibly years. They have hoped, as regulators generally hope, that the institution could restructure itself, stabilize, survive. On this Friday, they reach a conclusion that has become unavoidable. It cannot. The outflow rate is unsustainable. The liquidity facility has not arrested the withdrawals. The confidence, once broken at this scale and at this speed, cannot be rebuilt by a stressed institution under market pressure. Credit Suisse, if left to continue as an independent institution through the following week, will face a crisis that will not be contained to Switzerland. It has subsidiaries in dozens of countries. It has counterparty relationships with virtually every major global bank. It has approximately $580 billion in total assets. Its failure would not be a Swiss problem. The conclusion the regulators have reached, the conclusion that defines the next 48 hours, is that Credit Suisse must be absorbed by UBS over the weekend, before the Asian markets open on Monday, or the consequences will extend far beyond one troubled bank. The problem is that UBS doesn't particularly want to buy Credit Suisse. What the Swiss authorities have in mind is not a commercial deal negotiated between willing parties. It is, in effect, a shotgun marriage, a government-mandated combination in which Switzerland's largest bank is being asked to absorb its most troubled competitor under extreme time pressure, on terms that need to be structured to protect the financial system while not destroying UBS in the process. The negotiations that take place over Saturday and Sunday, March 18th and 19th, involve the senior leadership of both banks, their legal teams, their investment banking advisors, the Swiss government officials, and the central bank, all working against a deadline set not by any contract, but by the opening bell of the Tokyo Stock Exchange on Monday morning. When Tokyo opens, markets will want to know what has happened. If the answer is nothing, the reaction could trigger the kind of global financial contagion that the Swiss authorities are trying to prevent. UBS's conditions are demanding. The bank wants a significant discount to book value. It wants government backstops for potential losses on Credit Suisse's most problematic assets, specifically the investment bank, which UBS has no interest in and will need to wind down. It wants legal indemnities. It wants regulatory capital relief. It wants, essentially, to be insured by the Swiss government against the worst outcomes it is being asked to absorb. The Swiss government agrees to virtually everything. The alternative is worse. The price agreed? 3 billion Swiss francs. For a bank with approximately $580 billion in total assets. For a bank that, just 18 months earlier, had a market capitalization exceeding $30 billion. For a bank that was founded to build the Swiss railway system and had, for 167 years, been one of the pillars of one of the most financially sophisticated nations on Earth. 3 billion francs. There is one more element of the deal that will generate controversy long after the weekend is over. As part of the transaction, the Swiss financial regulator FINMA writes down to zero approximately 16 billion Swiss francs of Credit Suisse bonds, called AT1 bonds, additional Tier 1 bonds, a category of bank debt designed to absorb losses in exactly this kind of crisis scenario. The bondholders, institutional investors who had bought these instruments as debt, which in the normal order of things would be senior to equity, receive nothing, while the shareholders, who are lower in the capital structure, receive at least the $3 billion from UBS. The decision inverts the traditional hierarchy of creditors and generates immediate legal challenges. AT1 bond investors around the world, who hold roughly $275 billion in similar instruments across the global banking system, react with alarm, not just at their own losses, but at the precedent. If AT1 bonds can be zeroed while equity survives in a crisis resolution, the pricing assumptions underlying the entire AT1 market need to be reconsidered. The legal challenges to the AT1 write-down continue through the years that follow. The Swiss courts and regulators will spend considerable time defending the decision. Whether they ultimately prevail is a question the legal system is still processing. But on Sunday evening, March 19th, the deed is done. Credit Suisse ceases to exist as an independent institution. There is a version of the Credit Suisse story that is told entirely in numbers. The fines, the losses, the write-downs, the acquisition price, the AT1 wiped out. It is a compelling version. The numbers are extraordinary. But numbers tell you what happened without telling you what it felt like. And what it felt like matters. At its peak, Credit Suisse employed approximately 50,000 people globally. By the time UBS took it over, that number had fallen to around 50,000. But those 50,000 included many people who had joined in the Kerner restructuring era, believing the turnaround story, committing their careers and, in some cases, their savings through employee share purchases to the idea that the bank could be rebuilt. In the months following the acquisition, UBS announced a restructuring that would involve eliminating the majority of Credit Suisse's headcount, tens of thousands of jobs across Switzerland, London, New York, Singapore, Hong Kong, and the bank's other global locations. The restructuring process, which unfolded through 2023 and 2024, was the largest mass layoff in the history of the Swiss financial industry. The employees who lost their positions, many of them senior, many of them with long tenures, faced a job market that was, at precisely the moment they entered it, being flooded with Credit Suisse alumni. The supply of experienced banking professionals suddenly available exceeded the demand from competitors, depressing both job availability and compensation for everyone who was looking simultaneously. The client-facing employees, the wealth managers and private bankers who had spent years building relationships with clients who stayed at Credit Suisse because of their trust in a specific individual, faced the additional challenge that their clients were not necessarily following them to UBS. The UBS relationship managers already had their own books. The Credit Suisse clients were being integrated into a system that was larger, bureaucratically different, and not always smoothly accommodating of the specific service styles that the Credit Suisse private banking culture had developed. The shareholders, the institutional investors, and the retail shareholders, particularly the Swiss retail investors, for whom Credit Suisse stock was part of a broadly held portfolio of domestic companies, had watched the value of their holdings decline from over $30 billion to $3 billion. The loss of value was not distributed equally. The large institutions that had been able to sell during the decline had some ability to manage their exposure. The small shareholders, who had held through, believing the turnaround story, absorbing the annual report's optimism, trusting the CEO's assurances, they held to the end and received the full weight of the collapse. The Swiss national identity dimension of the collapse deserves acknowledgement. Credit Suisse was not just a bank in Switzerland. It was part of Swiss national identity in the way that very old institutions become inseparable from the place that built them. The bank's name, Credit Suisse, Swiss credit, embedded the national identity in the brand. Its headquarters in Zurich's parade plots, across the square from UBS, was part of the symbolic geography of Swiss financial power. Its annual results were a bellwether for the Swiss economy. Its charitable foundation supported cultural institutions and civil society organizations across the country. When it collapsed, it took some of that identity with it. Not a large fraction, and Switzerland is a resilient and wealthy enough society to absorb the blow without lasting damage. But the loss was real. and the people who had spent their careers building the institution, who had believed in what it stood for, who had stayed through the difficult years trusting that it would come right, those people felt the loss in ways that don't appear in financial analyses. They deserved better than what the institution's leadership gave them.
Let's ask the question that always follows a corporate catastrophe of this scale. Who was held accountable?
The answer, as in most corporate failure stories, is not enough people, not proportionately, and not in ways that fully match the scale of what happened. Thomas Gottstein, the CEO who presided over Greensill and Archegos, received a total compensation package of approximately 4.5 million Swiss francs in his final year, a year in which the bank lost billions of dollars, and its investment bank division suffered the most catastrophic single-year loss in Credit Suisse's history. He left the bank in July 2022, receiving a departure package that included notice period payments. He has not faced criminal charges or regulatory sanctions. Ulrich Körner, the CEO who oversaw the final 18 months and was CEO when the bank was sold, had his compensation reduced from earlier periods, but still received multi-million franc packages during his tenure. He has not faced sanctions.
The board members who oversaw the bank's decline across the scandal years, including multiple chairs and independent directors who were present through Greensill, Archegos, the espionage affair, the Mozambique bonds, and the multiple strategic pivots that went nowhere, have largely moved on to other board positions at other institutions. FINMA, the Swiss regulator, published reports identifying failures and issued regulatory reprimands to the bank as an institution. It opened enforcement proceedings against a small number of individuals. The proceedings, by the regulator's own admission, were constrained by the limits of FINMA's enforcement powers under Swiss law. FINMA cannot impose fines on individuals for most types of misconduct, a limitation that Swiss civil society and international regulatory bodies have identified as a significant gap in Switzerland's financial regulatory framework. The criminal justice system produced outcomes in individual cases. The Mozambique bond case included criminal convictions of specific bankers in the UK, and Swiss prosecutors pursued cases against some individuals. But the larger question, the accountability for the institutional failure, the decade plus of inadequate risk management, the governance failures, the leadership carousel, was not answered by the criminal justice system in ways that most observers found proportionate to the scale of the harm. The AT1 bondholders who lost 16 billion Swiss francs launched legal challenges that will take years to resolve. The class action lawsuits in the United States and other jurisdictions, representing shareholders who lost money as the bank declined, are similarly in the early stages of legal proceedings that will unfold over years. The Swiss parliamentary investigation into the collapse produced a detailed report identifying systemic failures in regulation and governance and making recommendations for strengthening the Swiss financial regulatory framework. The recommendations were important. The politicians who received them were appropriately serious. Whether the reforms they produce will be sufficient to prevent the next institutional failure is a question that will be answered by the next crisis. In the meantime, UBS has digested Credit Suisse. The combined institution is now, by some measures, one of the largest banks in the world relative to the size of its home country, a concentration of banking risk in the Swiss economy that itself produces concerns among regulators. The UBS CEO, Sergio Ermotti, who was brought back out of retirement to manage the integration, has described the combination as a once-in-a-generation challenge. He is not wrong. The generation that produced Credit Suisse's collapse left behind a question that the next generation of Swiss finance will spend years answering. There are stories that end, and stories that continue differently. The Credit Suisse story is the second kind. Its physical presence, the buildings, the name on the door, the logo, has been absorbed into UBS. But its lessons remain. And they are lessons worth the price of understanding, even if the price was paid by people who didn't choose to pay it. The first lesson is about the relationship between culture and control. Every major failure in Credit Suisse's final decade, Greensill, Archegos, Mozambique, the espionage affair, the tax evasion,
can be traced, at least in part, to a failure of culture. The culture of the investment bank, which rewarded aggressive deal-making and revenue generation with compensation structures that created enormous incentives to take risk and minimal incentives to decline business, was not adequately balanced by a culture of accountability and control. When risk managers raised concerns about Greensill's funds or Archegos's position size, the cultural pressure to service the client, to book the revenue, to not be the person who blocked the deal, was more powerful than the cultural pressure to say no. Risk management is easy to admire in the abstract. In practice, in institutions where the people who generate revenue have more status and more compensation than the people who constrain it, risk management is systematically underweighted. Credit Suisse's leadership knew this. They said the right things about risk culture in every annual report for 20 years. They did not successfully change it. The second lesson is about the costs of complexity. Credit Suisse tried to be too many things for too long. The tension between the Swiss private bank and the Wall Street investment bank, the tension that was built into the institution from the moment it acquired First Boston, was never resolved. The culture of discretion and the culture of aggressive deal-making are not natural companions. Managing a global institution that contains both requires either exceptional leadership sustained over a long period or a structural separation that prevents the more risky culture from contaminating the more stable one. Credit Suisse had neither. The third lesson is about trust as a non-renewable resource. Banks run on trust. This is a cliché, but like most clichés, it is a cliché because it is true. The specific form of trust a bank requires is not just that its deposits are safe or its statements are accurate. It is the broader trust that its judgment can be relied upon, that it will manage its own risk competently, that its leadership will behave with integrity, that its institutional behavior reflects values that align with what it claims to stand for. Once that trust is broken, each subsequent incident breaks it further, and the breaks become self-reinforcing. The clients who leave make the institution weaker, which makes more clients leave. Credit Suisse spent approximately 8 years making deposits into the trust deficit account through espionage scandals, through Mozambique, through tax evasion pleas, through Greensill and Archegos, and approximately 0 years making deposits into the trust asset account. The withdrawal, when it came, was terminal. The fourth lesson is about the limits of restructuring announcements. In the financial industry, the announcement of a restructuring plan has a specific and well-understood market function. It is supposed to signal that management has identified the problems and has a credible plan to address them. Credit Suisse made restructuring announcements with a frequency that, rather than increasing confidence, actively eroded it. Each new plan was an acknowledgement that the previous plan had failed. Each new CEO was an implicit admission that the previous CEO had been wrong. The investors and clients who were supposed to be reassured by the announcements had seen too many of them to find them reassuring. There is a point in institutional decline where announcing a restructuring is counterproductive, where the signal the market receives is not management is in control, but management is still trying to figure out what management was thinking before. Credit Suisse passed that point sometime around 2019 or 2020 and never found its way back. The fifth and final lesson is the one that matters most, and it is the lesson that Swiss banking regulators are now attempting to incorporate into their framework, the lesson about the relationship between size and stability. Credit Suisse was, for most of its final decade, assessed by regulators as adequately capitalized, meaning the financial cushions it held against potential losses were sufficient by the regulatory standards in place to absorb plausible adverse scenarios. It was not classified as in crisis, not subject to extraordinary supervisory intervention, not required to restructure its business under regulatory pressure. And then, over the course of approximately a week in March 2023, it went from adequately capitalized to requiring emergency absorption by a competitor. The speed of the transition from troubled but viable to not viable as an independent institution reflects the specific fragility of trust-based institutions in the social media era.
The regulatory frameworks that assess capital adequacy and liquidity on periodic reporting cycles were not built for institutions whose fundamental asset, their clients' confidence, can be withdrawn at digital speed.
The gap between how regulators measured Credit Suisse's health and how quickly its health actually collapsed is a gap that the global regulatory community is now working to close. Whether they close it before the next institution enters the same trajectory is the question that banking supervisors around the world are working with appropriate urgency to answer. Zurich's Parade Platz is quiet in the early morning. The square that has been the symbolic center of Swiss financial power for over a century, where the headquarters of Credit Suisse and UBS face each other across an open space, where the trams run and the suits walk, and the wealth of half the world has, in some form, passed through, looks the same as it always has. The Credit Suisse sign is gone from the building. The UBS logo is going up, or has gone up, depending on when you read this. The people who worked inside, many of them gone now, scattered to other banks and other cities and other industries, are not visible in the early morning stillness. The clients whose money once lived in the accounts managed from those floors have moved elsewhere. The institutional memory of 167 years of banking has been absorbed, partially, incompletely, into a neighboring institution that didn't ask to receive it. Alfred Escher founded Credit Suisse to build something Switzerland needed. He understood that finance, at its best, is not an end in itself, but a means. A way of aggregating capital and directing it toward things that create genuine value in the world. The railways he financed with Credit Suisse's capital are still there. They still carry people through the Alps. They are still, in some real sense, his legacy. The institution he built lasted 167 years. It financed the industrialization of a country, survived 2 world wars, navigated depressions and crises, employed hundreds of thousands of people, managed the wealth of millions. This is not nothing. The ledger of Credit Suisse's existence is not simply a list of its failures, but the ledger of its final decade is, and the people responsible for that decade will carry it, whether or not the courts and the regulators produce the formal accounting that the scale of the failure warrants. The lessons are paid for. They are available. Whether the next generation of bankers and regulators and boards learns them, or whether they arrive at the same crossroads by the same route in 20 or 30 years, is not a question that the Credit Suisse story can answer. It is a question that every institution that believes it is too old, too large, too established to fail would do well to sit with. Because Credit Suisse believed exactly that. Right until the weekend, it learned otherwise. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to watch more content like this, simply click the like and share button and subscribe to this channel to get notified when we post new content. See you on the next episode of the Dark Ledger series.